So, I see a lot of author shenanigans in my query pile. And I can understand why. You are desperate to get an agent's attention. You are desperate to show the editor or the agent that you have a wonderful voice and are one to watch and are going to be the next bestseller. But when you try too hard, you end up coming off kind of amateur. The most common mistakes, oh, and I'm going to say this again, don't stress out if you've made some of these mistakes before. You will always make mistakes, and you most often can go back and fix them. Don't get stressed out about this. All writers make some of these mistakes. But learn these now so that you won't make them in the future. Most of the time, when I read an intro to a story that I just don't connect with, it's because the author is trying to be too artful. And what I mean by that is probably, you may have heard it being described as writerly. When I can see the author's hand, when I feel like an author is telling me something instead of the characters telling me something or doing something. When authors try to be overly flowery in their prose or overly dramatic, it's an indicator of trying when we really just want it to be. As we mentioned just a little bit ago, if you're trying to be snarky or funny or obscene or inflammatory for any reason solely to get the agent's attention, then you're ignoring the needs of your book. Your characters don't want you to be a jerk on the first page. The characters want you to tell their story. If your characters are jerks, that's another problem, but if you are trying to do these things to get attention, you are not serving your story, you're not writing your story, you're just trying to get attention. Kind of like a toddler. I'm just kidding. If you were trying, I often see that people are trying to do something like that other awesome book you read. That worked for the other author. It probably won't work for you. If you try to model your book after somebody else's, then you're a kind of a copycat. Not a legal sense, but imitation isn't exactly the truest form of flattery. It actually just kind of makes the reader feel like the book is too familiar, that they've been there and done that, and they've seen that already, and it kind of bores them. So don't try to imitate other authors. Be yourself. You may be using a device like a prologue or foreshadowing or flashback to hook the reader. Sometimes these are successful. We're going to talk about prologues in a little bit too. So sometimes these can be successful, and I know you're thinking, well, how do I know if I'm successful? Unless you have been critiqued or vetted by other people and you've had 27 million beta readers and they all love the prologue, I would avoid using prologues or foreshadowing or flashback as a hook. They're very artificial seeming, they distract away from your main storyline, and they just kind of feel fake. If you're using it as a device because you don't know what else to do, avoid it. If you're trying to start in media res, you might have heard of this before, it means in the middle of things in Latin. That can provide a very active, kind of fast-paced introduction where the reader may think, oh my gosh, what's going on? I need to know more. What's happening? How do I know what's going on? Most often, though, you haven't provided enough context, and the reader will just be confused. You have to, if we're not invested in the story, if we're not sure of our footing and where we are and when we are, we'll just kind of be annoyed. And I'm like, well, I don't care about what these two people are fighting about. Who are they? Whose side am I on? And we'll just, as an agent, I would just put down the book. If you don't, a solution to some of all these mistakes is, if you don't know where to start anywhere. Just start writing. If you have to talk about the weather, if you have to talk about some other cliches that we'll go over it a little bit, do it. Get it out of your system, and then eventually you'll get to the real start of your story. You'll get through all these little road speed bumps to warm yourself up into the storytelling, and then you can go back and cut it. The delete key is your best friend. If you're worried that you're deleting the best sentences of your life, do what I did when I was in graduate school. I just was terrified of deleting the most perfect sentences ever, and of course they were never perfect. I when I was cutting big blocks of text, I copied it into another file, and I called it my delete file, and I never, ever, ever went back to that file. Every story or every novel portion I wrote was so much better for using that. So if you are distressed about deleting things and don't know where to start your novel, just start typing, just start writing, and trim it. When you get to a point where you think, okay, this is where the story really takes off, put that stuff in another file, and I bet you'll never touch it again. But the biggest thing, too, when I see novels started not quite excellently, is because the author is trying too hard. They're trying to force something into the beginning. They're trying to cram too much in there. They're trying to appear a certain way as an author instead of letting their characters speak for themselves. It's trying too hard. Don't try too hard. Just write.